Heaven help us all. What a great message to get us started for today. And I've used the sermon title, Use It or Lose It, in a bit of a reference to the scripture from this morning. But before we begin, I'll just take a moment of prayer before we start. Creator, may the written word and these spoken words lead us all to you, the living word. Amen. Now, I brought a storybook this morning. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I was really pleased to find this little dog-eared thing left in our kids' bookshelf. The bookshelf's gathering a bit of dust because 16-year-olds don't do bedtime stories like this anymore. But when our kids were younger, we read this book a lot, and it's a beautiful little Jewish folk tale. And it's a grandfather and his grandson Joseph. And so Joseph gets a beautiful blanket. His grandfather has a talent to make a blanket. And so Joseph drags it around everywhere, as kids do. And throughout the story, it keeps getting damaged. And he wants to throw it out. And everyone tells him to throw it out. And grandfather says, "Don't lose it, I can fix it." And so he changes it, and he'll retool it into a jacket and into a vest. And then he switches and makes it a little tie, and it gets soup on it. And eventually it's a tiny little button. And the button is so small that Joseph still can tuck it away, even though he's getting older. And it's still with him, and eventually he drops it in the creek. And he's devastated. But grandfather says, "Don't worry, there's something to come of this." And it turns out that Joseph's talent was not with fabric as his grandfather's. His talent was telling a story. And so he turns this beautiful tale of the fabric and the gift into a story that can travel with him. And I love this because it shows the way that the people in our lives, when they share their gifts and talents with us, they can become a treasured memory, and they can be with us physically, or they can be with us as we go in different ways, depending on what we've picked up in our journey. And I really loved how resourceful this grandfather was, that whenever Joseph returned, determined that his special blanket was lost forever, Grandpa would find a way to save it so he wouldn't have to lose it. Grandpa knew how to use it, not lose it. And in doing this, he managed to share something both tangible and intangible that Joseph could take with him through life. For the short time, he had the creations his grandfather had made that he could hold. But for the lifetime, he had those talents that had blessed him, and he had a story to tell using his own talents. And I know we can all think about people in our lives who've had an impact or are still having an impact today, and what a loss it would be if they weren't able or willing or brave enough to share their gift or talent, no matter how small it might be. Think of those who teach and cook and listen or paint or fix or sing and coach and clean to enrich our lives and give them meaning. What I noticed in the Matthew passage when I reflected on it this week was that the workers had two responses to being gifted with this bonus money. In those days, it was actually called a talent. What they were given was a talent. So they were to use this while their manager was gone. The ones who invested, when he returned, they were praised. And the one who buried it away, thinking it was safe, he was told he shouldn't play it safe. He was reprimanded. The one who risked the most, who put himself out there, was rewarded. And I know this passage has sometimes been preached to help people focus on investments and making money and capitalism. We don't have to think about it that way. I prefer we think about it from another angle, where we shift the story. And if we think of the master or the boss, depending how it's told, if we think of that leader as a Jesus figure, the parable becomes an example of how to be a true disciple and follow the Jesus way. So instead of taking a risk and investing the money, it can actually be about taking a risk and investing what we've been given to share the joy of God, the leader of Jesus, who's always directing us back, who wants us to share in the feast of giving, the joy of discovering and sharing with the world what we have found inside. And so what it comes down to is we're called to use our talents and not to be afraid. And so it seems worth pointing out that if we notice the gifts that our Creator has provided in us, we sometimes do need a reminder to go ahead and use it, or else we'll lose it. Now I realize it's so easy to say what we're supposed to do and with what we've been given. It's really easy to just say it. It sounds simple and it sounds a bit empty. It's easy to rhyme off the phrase, use it or lose it. It sounds like a good theory, but doesn't life have a way of getting in the way of doing all those things we actually enjoy? Some of us maybe thought we were good at something when we were a kid and then we heard a critical remark, an uncaring teacher, or worse, that own internal critic that tells us we're not good enough. And that's the most discouraging voice we've had to struggle with to silence. And so we don't use it. Some of us have a passion to create or serve in a way that society looks down on or says, you'll never make a living at that. And so we put it on a shelf. And I know this one's hard, because life and obligations will pull us in all these different directions with our lists and our jobs and our tasks, and we just haven't figured out how to find time for enjoyment, much less a reminder of what our talents might be and how to share those. Now, somehow, all these ideas yesterday, when I was really pulling it together in the end, it came to a series of letters that start with P, and I don't know how that happened. Sometimes spirit and my creativity get a little mixed up, and we end up with some alliteration. So we can often fall in the trap of burying these valuable gifts from the world due to a set of P words. So here they are: postponing, perfection, or rather waiting for perfection, or the perfect time, producing, the daily grind of our work and our tasks and all those to-dos, and finally, this year, P is for pandemic. So when it comes to postponing and waiting for that perfect time to live the life we're waiting for, it reminds me of a major event in our lives, and when I counted back, I think it was exactly 10 years ago in December. We were parents to 3 young kids and busy caring for and milking a flock of sheep. Yes, we did that. We milked sheep, and I was about 4 years into a steady job in the field, supporting farmers as a resource person. So everything on paper was fine, but we were up to our eyeballs in everything. And some of the parts that Brad and I enjoyed about our life and our gifts, we just weren't able to put the time to or figure out how to pursue. So we were busy checking off the December list, the activities, the outings. We threw the kids in the van and we were rushing off to Embro to visit friends after church for a Christmas visit. And the roads were slushy, but it wasn't terrible, it was visible. So I had lots of time to notice the truck that was pulling out before it was about to cross our path. And that second was a lifetime. Everything quickly slammed into reality in a burst of pain and shock and smoke and airbags and ambulances. And you know, our vehicle was destroyed, but we weren't. And the kids barely even had a mark, just the tiniest little mark from their seatbelt put in them where they're supposed to be. We adults didn't fare so well. And when I think about what came after, there were 2 main outcomes. We saw right away that our family and our church community had time and talents to spare when we needed them. So in came the casseroles, and the childcare, the cards and the calls, and the prayers, and errands, because we couldn't drive, and even money was donated to help us as we literally hobbled our way through Christmas in our bruised up haze. And the other outcome was this clear sense that somehow, wow, we're still here, and we don't know why, we don't know how. We've got this life and we have to use it or lose it. And so with the miracle of chiropractors and massage therapists and lots of patience and some housekeeping, and for me eventually, we began to ease off on the bruising and the whiplash. And for me, my knees and my ankle had me on crutches. And eventually it came for most of the winter which was not the best time ever. It's never the best time. But with these little people in my life and the ice, it was a pretty long winter. But I felt so lucky when I started to feel, I could feel feeling back at my knee, and when I felt strong enough to walk without a cane again, I just felt so lucky, and I thought, I better stop taking this for granted. And the stubborn person that I am, I thought, I don't want to give up on running. So it's winter, and I should book something for July. So July 1st, I booked myself in for the Embro Kilt Run, and I did a 10-kilometer, very slow run with my sister-in-law. And it hurt after, it hurt during, but I couldn't believe that I had this time. Because back in December, we didn't know what was going to happen or how badly we were hurt. So that moment changed a lot for us. And it made me pay attention to some other things in my life that I had been missing. And I guess we could call it the nudge from spirit, or whatever your sense of that is, that kept me interested in cultivating my interest in things like art and music and learning and leading, which I had been kind of pushing aside. And I really think that time 10 years ago was that shock to my system that put me on the path to pay attention to the possibilities of ministry and whatever that path might lead for me into the future. So as we know, postponing and waiting for those perfect moments to do the next thing we really like to do, those get in the way of our exploring our internal gifts, and being on the treadmill of producing is definitely another factor. And when I think about producing, I think about the grind of the everyday that we've all seen. I mean, we live in a capitalist world, and we all have obligations to put food on the table and find ways to accomplish and produce. And for many of us, that means being part of the working world in some form or another. But it's even more pronounced in the countries which some call the two-thirds world, where people are still struggling with the development in their country and the oppression that exists in certain classes. And so in January, I was able to travel with our then 15-year-old Xavier, and we went to El Salvador with a group, a charity group called Otra Fe, and their mission is to, it's not a mission group, but it's a group that has a mission to support folks where they are with the projects that intend to help them in their communities with healthcare, with food production, improving food production, and with education. And when I think about the opportunities for women, the opportunities they are making there for women, it's an amazing thing to see. So I picture the young woman I met named Janine, and I see someone who was given an opportunity to use it, not lose it, and is bringing her gifts and a great amount of hope to her home community. So with one of the small education grants, her family was able to see their way clear to allow her to pursue university, which is a very big step for a family with nothing. And the other option would have been her heading into very low-paid work forever and not being able to explore her gifts. But the result is this woman now who has the gifts of intellect and caring, and she's been able to take the time to translate those. And so now when I see her updates on Facebook, I see her leading the children at church as a teacher, working on innovative vegetable growing projects, and serving today as a Red Cross volunteer to help with the COVID effort down there. It's quite amazing to witness. And I just noticed how that little bit of investment of money meant that Janine could explore her gifts and her talents in a way that she wouldn't have been able to find on her own. So I'm thankful for that. And the final P word I listed today was pandemic, which, as we know, means our usual outlets for creativity and togetherness are all disrupted. Our clubs and our sports and arts and the games and volunteering we enjoy, they're all changed or paused. And in a lot of ways, don't we feel a little bit paralyzed? There's one more P word. We're feeling paralyzed, and we feel like we'd like to wait until everything gets back to normal, and then somehow we can just resume. But it seems like we're in a time that tells us that waiting is not the right way, and that normal will be different. So we can't really afford to wait. We have to find ways to use it or lose it now. And someone that I'm inspired by, she's a mentor of mine that I've known for about about 20 years, and her name's Eleanor. She was preparing for her very first, she's in a new career now, her very first art installation. So she had a big show for June. She was inviting people to the show where you be together and you see art. And the pandemic says no. And Eleanor and her partner Paul said, okay, how do we do this? Because she wanted to share her gifts. And whether or not she's aware of it, I think there's a nudge there that helped her and Paul figure out a new way. So they turned their garage into what they called the Shift Cafe. So they were shifting their way. And they, over 6 or 8 weeks, were able to invite people on a schedule. And Paul would quickly convert the garage, mount the installation. People would come and look at the art. He would play the music. And they were safely seeing the people they wanted to see and sharing her gift and his in a different way, in a little corner of Brampton that was probably having a pretty tough time. So I really have lost my place. And that's good though, I enjoyed the story, so I wanted to share it. I love how she found a way to share her art and, in her sense, to use it and not lose that time. And of course, not all of our gifts result in something showy. We can't all have a garage art show, and we're not all going to work for the Red Cross. But I've heard from some of you about the impacts of those thoughtful phone calls and check-ins and errands, and the folks that write the cards or share an inspiring post on Facebook. All those things that happen, those little touches into our humanity, all those small home-based efforts, those are gifts too. And we can't underestimate the boost that we'll give somebody when we share that little piece of time and a little piece of our heart. Just the fact that we've taken time to notice and do the caring thing for someone else shows that gift. So in every chapter of life, I know we find ways and excuses and limits of what we can do or what we cannot do. But if we focus too much on the limits, we'll end up doing nothing. So instead of burying those gifts, or burying that imaginary money, when we take time to notice the possibilities, even the smallest ones, our Creator celebrates the difference that we're making in our own lives and beyond. So today we're invited to enter the joy of the Spirit. We are encouraged to be part of creating a meal at a table where there is enough. It's not fancy, but there is enough. Enough food and grace and light for everyone who gathers. In her poem, The Summer Day, Mary Oliver asks, who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear and the grasshopper? And my favorite line is where she goes on to say, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? My hope for you is that you'll find every day a small way to celebrate the gifts you've been given. That you find your own way to make something out of nothing. Not waiting for life to be perfect or waiting for yourself to be perfect. It's never going to exist. But that you'll also take the notice and sense the joy that it brings Creator and creation when you find time to notice and do so. That when you look closely and you remember what it is you've got, you'll find a way to use some of it right now while you've got it and fully live your one wild and precious life. May it be so.